Welcome to The Quest Presents Live with Passion from the studios of the Guadalupe Radio Network. Join us as we journey together on this pilgrimage of faith. And now your host, Father Cedric Pisegna.
I'm Father Cedric Pisegna. Welcome to Live with Passion. I want to proclaim to you from the Gospel of John. This is Jesus speaking. He said to the Jews who believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth. The truth will make you free." We're now on the other side of the pandemic. For 2 years, people were struggling. They lost their jobs, and many people were struggling with isolation, loneliness, depression, relationship problems. People were stuck at home, and that led to some inner fighting and different things. And then there's the whole situation with bad habits and habitual sins and addictions. Actually, the anatomy of an addiction is this. It starts off with a simple attraction, and then there's an attachment, and then it progresses to an addiction. Spiritually, we say that evil gets a toehold, then he gets a foothold, then he gets a stronghold. Even after the pandemic, addictions have increased. There's still struggles with people finding jobs, and people are struggling with all that did happen during the pandemic. I want to talk about that because this is a series about trusting God. You have to trust that God will move you forward, that you don't have to stay stuck in a habitual sin or in some type of a stronghold or an addiction or attachment. You can move forward. And you have to trust that you are the apple of God's eye, that He loves you, He cares for you, even though you may be stuck, even though you're going through a hard time, that God is still there for you. Trust that God is there and He's going to help you to move forward, even if you're, quote, sinning against God. An addiction is a hard thing. It's when you lose your willpower toward a substance or a behavior and you really don't have a whole lot of control. And the way out of an addiction is through God's help. You have to trust God to move you forward. And during the pandemic, all kinds of addictions occurred. People were getting addicted to alcohol, to drinking, substances like painkillers, sleeping pills, fentanyl, Zolpidem. Then there's the behavior addictions. There's substance addictions and behavior addictions. Behavior addictions such as internet gambling, pornography, relying on social media, heavy iPhone use. I want to talk about media because a lot of people got stuck in media. First of all, I want to tell you that media has a very positive side. I know because I use broadcast media to reach out with the gospel everywhere, via television, radio, and the internet, social media. Very positive side. Media informs us, it entertains us, gives us a chance to comment, it gives us a voice. Media has a great positive side and it's very important, but it also has a dark side. If you've ever seen in a restaurant, sometimes you'll see a couple or a whole family and they're sitting there and they're not talking because they're all sitting there texting. It can really interfere in personal relationships. And media has a dark side when it comes to driving. Many people nowadays text while driving. It's very dangerous. You can end up hurting yourself or somebody else. And then when you get up in the morning, used to be the first thing you did is pray or go to the bathroom. Nowadays, it seems like everybody's going to their iPhone first. What kind of emails did I get? What messages did I receive? And if it's something negative, it can really cloud your brain for the rest of the day. It decreases productivity at work if you're going through those things. Media has a very positive side, but it also has a very negative side. I want to explain what media is. Media is a medium through which communication happens. Television is media. Radio is media. And of course, there's print media. I talked about broadcast media, television, radio, but there's print media, things like newspapers, books, magazines. That's media too. It's a mode or a medium of communication. And then, of course, there is social or digital media. Internet, iPhones, Facebook, Twitter, video games, Zoom. We're all familiar with those things. During the pandemic, all those things spiked because people were at home. They were isolated and they were looking to media to entertain, looking to media for pleasure, looking to media to communicate. Hours and hours were spent on media. As I said, it starts off with an attraction, then progresses to an attachment, then it progresses even more to an addiction, where you actually lose your willpower. What constitutes an addiction? It's an intense, I want to underline that word intense desire, urge, or craving, or want toward a substance, a behavior, or a person that makes you lose self-control. You don't have willpower anymore. It has willpower over you. It's this constant craving toward a substance, a behavior, or a person. Elizabeth Vargas used to be on television. She was an anchor woman for, I believe it was ABC News. And this is what she said when she was interviewed by Barbara Walters. She said, "I would die for my children. I would kill for my children. But I couldn't stop drinking for my children." She's a professed alcoholic. And that's exactly what happens. It takes your willpower and it has dominance over you. Now, there are two main types of addictions. Just wanted to clarify that for you. First of all, substance addictions. We're familiar with that. Drinking alcohol, food addictions towards sugar especially, opioids, painkillers, smoking. Those are substance addictions. And it can consume a person. It can take over their life. The other type of an addiction is called a behavioral or a process addiction. Same thing. Has to do with the media, gambling, pornography, things like that. It has to do with behaviors that you're participating in. In any addiction, this is the common denominator. There's some type of a pleasure being held out before you. Think about a carrot on a stick making you go forward toward that carrot. Pleasure is what we're after. It has to go back to that psychological phenomenon, the pleasure-pain principle. And pleasure is held out in front of us because we all like that endorphin release or the dopamine release. We all strive for that because we want that pleasure, that peace within. And that's exactly what happens with an addiction. It leads to a high. It leads to a zing. But the problem is our body gets used to it. That's called tolerance. And once your body starts getting tolerant toward the high, you need more and more of the high to achieve the same pleasure, to get the same result. Therefore, the addiction gets deeper and deeper and worse and worse. It's kind of like quicksand where the more you struggle, the more you go for the high, the deeper you go. Worst case scenario, for example, say you go to Las Vegas. You're not a gambler, but you decide to play blackjack. Sit down at the table. Worst case scenario is that you win. What am I talking about? Well, you win at blackjack and you get the dopamine release and it feels so good. You win some money and what's going to happen is you're going to go back because you're going to want to win again. Best case scenario is that you go to Las Vegas or Reno or wherever, you sit down at the blackjack table and you lose. Everybody hates to lose. It's painful. You don't like it, but I'll tell you this, you won't go running back to the blackjack table right away because you just lost. And that's what has to happen. There has to be some type of pain in your life in order for you not to get addicted. I remember one of the best things that ever happened to me when I was a young man, probably about 8 years old, sitting with my mother at the kitchen table. My mom was such a gracious person, a good person, but she had one bad habit, and that was smoking. She used to smoke cigarettes when I grew up. So here I am, 7, 8 years old. I'm sitting there at the table eating some cookies. And I looked at my mother as she was smoking, and I said, Mom, I said, give me a drag of that cigarette. She said, no. I said, come on, Mom, give me just one drag. She said, no. And I begged her so much, she finally gave me the cigarette. And here I am, 7 years old, with these virgin lungs, and I didn't even know what to do. I took a drag, and I mean, it was terrible. Let's just say that the cookie that was in here went up here. Fast forward now to my high school days. My friends are there and standing out in a group of people, and we're all talking everything. People break out cigarettes, and they're all smoking, and one of my friends hands a cigarette to me, and no thank you. See, I still had a bad taste in my mouth from that cigarette with my mom. Best thing that ever could have happened to me, because I never wanted a cigarette during high school or any other time in my life. I still don't smoke. I don't want anything to do with it. See what I'm saying? It's the pleasure-pain principle. Now, as human beings, we're pretty complex. We're more than just an animal that strives toward pleasure and tries to avoid pain. But the bottom line is it's a psychological truth. As human beings, we gravitate toward pleasure and we avoid pain. And that's some of the foundation of an addiction. We want pleasure, we want the zing, we want the good feeling, we want the peace, and we want to avoid, we want to escape. We try to get away from the painful situations in our life. Oftentimes addictions are fueled by escapism. Of course, many times people have a predisposition toward an addiction. That's why it's called a disease. But that doesn't let you off the hook. You're still culpable for your addiction because you can make the decision and be responsible for yourself and get into recovery. That's why you're culpable. You may have a disease. You're not culpable for that, but you are responsible for getting help. How did I get into this whole thing about addictions? Well, let me tell you that I have produced a 4-part series on addictions called There Is a Solution. It's a series about not only addictions, but how to recover. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I talk about recovery and how God makes all things work to good. You have to see that God knows how to write straight with the crooked lines, with our brokenness, with our habitual sins, with our getting stuck, with our addictions. He knows how to write straight with those crooked lines. How did I get into all this? Well, I live at a retreat center, Holy Name Retreat Center in Houston, Texas. And when I got there as a seminarian, I knew nothing about the 12-step program. But we're a mecca for the 12-step program. Just about every day, groups come and they meet. And we have 12-step retreats about alcoholism, about gambling, about sex, about food, Overeaters Anonymous. And I was invited to minister to those folks. I had no understanding of it, so I had to learn about it. And I learned the lingo, and I came to understand that it's a very Christian spirituality. It has to do with the 12 steps, and it's based on the Bible, it's based on God, and it's a very spiritual program. And I began to develop in my understanding about what the 12-step program was, started as a Catholic priest to talk about it from the lectern, from the pulpit at churches. And it was interesting the response that I got at the back door. Father, finally, people would shake my hand. Finally, we're hearing about the 12-step program. I'm a member of the 12-step program, they would tell me. Thank you for talking about it. And as I talked about it, I realized that there's an epidemic going on, not just during the pandemic, but throughout the world. People are struggling with addictions because of the pain that they're going through in their relationships, their physical suffering, the trials that they're going through, unemployment, too much time on their hand, boredom, whatever it is, and they're turning to drugs and alcohol and media and different things and getting stuck. We all have a hole in our soul, if you will. We all have this incompleteness within that really only God can fill. And what happens is we try to fill it with food and with drugs and with drinking and with media and with all these different things, and it satisfies for a little while, but then it leaves you empty and you need more. And I've discovered in my own life, the only reality that really satisfied is a relationship with God. Because that doesn't go away. You never get tolerated or tolerant to that. There is pleasure with that relationship, and it does really bring you a high. I wrote a book called There Is a Solution, and I produced a series, There Is a Solution. If you are addicted, if you know family members who are addicted, I invite you to get that series, DVD or CD. It's called There Is a Solution. That comes right from the big book of AA. And my book, There Is a Solution. Over 200 pages to help you to move forward and not stay stuck. I want to tell you a little bit about what's in that book and how to move forward. First of all, Alcoholics Anonymous in the 12-Step program was started by a man named Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson lived in New York City back in the mid-1900s, studying law, going to law school, but I guess the pressure of going to school and studying and the hardships and the different problems he was going through made him turn to alcohol. And he had many episodes where he bottomed out, ended up in a hospital, drunk, depressed, 4 times actually, the Towns Hospital in New York. Finally, after the 4th time, when he was in the hospital, he was so depressed, so bottomed out, he didn't have a relationship with God, and he finally called out. He said, God, if you're there, help me. That's one of the most beautiful prayers you can pray. It's just simply, help me. And God, who sees everything, touched him. He called it an epiphany, a manifestation of grace. And at that moment, Bill Wilson discovered God in a fresh new way. He had an awakening, and he never drank after that. He then founded the 12-Step program, and he founded it because he wanted people that were struggling with alcohol or other addictions to come into recovery. But then he said the number one reason why I founded AA and the 12 Steps is because he wanted people to have an awakening with God. That is so beautiful, because AA and the 12-Step program is based, it's a spiritual program based on a relationship with God. That's just the way God works. He takes the negative situations in our life, the painful situations, our fall, and he brings redemption. It's through God that you can recover. First step, you have to admit, underline that you have a problem with a substance or a behavior. Unless you admit it, you're never going to get better. But if you admit it, that's the first step. You also have to admit that you can't get better in and of yourself, that you are powerless over getting better. Remember what I told you about Elizabeth Vargas? She could die for her children, but she couldn't stop drinking for her children. She tried, and that's just it. People try, maybe for a little while they can stop drinking or drugging or viewing pornography or whatever it is, but then eventually they go back to it, because in and of yourself you just can't do it. That's one of the prime foundations and tenets of the 12-Step program, that you need help. You have to admit that you have a problem and that you don't have power over the addiction. Wanted to tell you that usually you admit it when there's some type of a bottoming out. For Bill Wilson, it happened in the hospital room. For you, it might be if you're texting while you're driving and you get into an accident. That might be the experience that you need. Remember, pain that leads to recovery. Or perhaps you're viewing pornography and your wife catches you. That bottoming out experience might help you to come into recovery. Or say you're gambling and you lose your vacation money, and that bottoming out experience, that painful experience, can help you to come into recovery. You can have an intervention. What's an intervention? I'm talking about ways that you can come to admit that you have a problem. An intervention is when your family confronts you with your behavior, or your friends confront you with your behavior. Let's take, for example, during the pandemic, what skyrocketed more than anything else was iPhone use. People are on their iPhones for 2, 3, 4, some 8, 9 hours a day. Here's an intervention for you. On your iPhone, if you have an Apple iPhone, you can also do it on an Android phone. But on your Apple phone, you just simply go to Settings and then scroll down a little bit and look where it says Screen Time. And look at what it tells you. What is your screen time? Is it 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? It'll give you your screen time for the whole week. How much is too much? You have to decide that for yourself, but to me, I mean, if you're on your iPhone for 2 to 3 to 4 hours a day, that's too much. I like what Pope Francis said. He said you ought to be reading the Bible as much as you're on your iPhone. That's called an intervention. When somebody confronts you with your behavior, then really quickly wanted to tell you that you got to trust that this is the second step. Even though you're powerless, God has the power. You trust God. You put your trust in God. This is how you develop a relationship with Him. Not always on the mountaintop. Sometimes you're going through the valley, through the hard times of life. And it's when you're going through that valley, that bottoming out, you're stuck. That's when you trust God's power, His strength to get you out of that rut. To bring you out of an addiction. God doesn't free you. What He does is He helps you to face it and to recover. Recovery is key. I think about a man who helped me write this book on addictions. He was a gambler, wasn't going to church, finally decided that he couldn't do it on his own, turned to God. Now he's a pillar of the church, friend of mine, benefactor. And that's called redemption. That's exactly what can happen in your life. God bringing you into recovery. Third step, really quickly, you surrender to the care of God. As I said before, you're the apple of God's eye. You're special. He loves you. Yeah, you may be stuck. You may be going through trials and tribulations. You may be stuck in an addiction or maybe a habitual sin, but God has not given up on you. You're the apple of His eye. He will do anything. He sent His Son to the cross for you and me personally. That's how in love God is with us. So He won't give up on you. You surrender to the care of God. You trust that God does care for you. You trust that He's got the power to get you even out of an addiction. Those steps are exactly how you come into recovery. Right where you are, take a deep breath in, breathe in healing, let out the toxins. Take another breath, breathe in strength, let out your failures. Breathe in grace, let out your defeats. Okay, keep breathing. It's time to make a move. Stop staying stuck. This episode is about helping those of you who are addicted. It's also about helping those who may be in your family who are addicted or stuck. Get that book, There Is a Solution, that series, this series, and I want you to trust right now that there is a solution, that you can recover, you can move forward from habitual sins, from wherever you feel stuck. God knows how to right straight with the crooked lines of our life, and that trust that God is working for good in your life right now. It is a new day. Something good is about to happen. It's time to move forward, and there's no reason to stay stuck. Don't just live, live with passion. I received an email from a woman and she said, Father Cedric, thank you so much for ministering to real life situations. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I don't want to talk about pie in the sky type stuff. I want to talk about what's really happening in people's lives. And as I said, there's an epidemic during the pandemic and even after the pandemic. And that epidemic has to do with people being stuck in habitual sins, but also stuck in addictions. I see it everywhere. And if that's you, there's hope. You can move forward, or somebody in your family, there's hope. There is a solution. In fact, that's the name of my book. I want you to get that. Over 200 pages. It's real life situations and stories to help you to move forward based on the 12-step program that is helping millions and millions of people to come to recovery and stay in recovery. I also produced a series called There Is a Solution, 4 episodes about moving forward if you're stuck. Every time you purchase my book, those CDs, DVDs, it supports my ministry and keeps me proclaiming the gospel everywhere. Thank you in advance for that. And thank you also for supporting my programs by your donations. Really appreciate it. All you have to do, 844-FATHER-C will take care of you there. Go to my secure website, fathercedric.org, or write me in Houston, Texas. When you purchase my resources, give a donation. It really supports me. Thank you so much in advance. Don't just live, live with passion.
Major decisions can feel daunting. Do you feel lost and alone? Not sure what path to take? Life coaching may be the right option for you. Whether it's practicing accountability or creating a better plan that works in your life, we are here to serve with Christ, always at the center. God's plan is always the best plan for us. We just may not be able to see it right now. Let us help at standtalltoday.com.
Hi, I'm Father Cedric Pisegna. I'm so glad that you tuned into the program. Welcome to Live with Passion. This is a series about trusting in God. I want to proclaim to you from the Gospel of John, chapter 5. This is why the Jews persecuted Jesus, because he healed on the Sabbath. Jesus answered them, "My Father is working still, and I am working also." This is a series about trusting in God. The number one prayer request I get has to do with people's health. The second prayer request that I get in terms of number has to do with unemployment. Father, pray for me to get a job. Unfortunately, millions of people are out of work. At this time, as I'm filming this, 3.7% unemployment rate, and that's pretty far down from what it was. In the Ukraine, where there's a war going on, 35% unemployment rate. Some 22 million are underemployed. That means that they work part-time, they're overqualified for their job, maybe they have an engineering degree and they're working in a department store. It can be really, really hard. One of the hardest things that I went through as a teenager was not being able to find a job. As I was graduating from college, I had a degree in business and social work. I lived in Massachusetts. I remember I was searching for a job and there just wasn't anything good. Certainly nothing that was paying well. And I struggled with it. I looked, I tried. I wasn't good at carpentry, didn't really like mechanics, didn't want to go into the military. I chose business and social work in college, didn't really like that either. Wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life, couldn't find a job, and it devastated me. If you can't find a job, it cuts to your self-image, cuts to who you are, your self-esteem. I remember how down I felt and how hard it was for me. Right around that time, God touched my life, and it was perfect timing because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. And then eventually I felt a call to ministry. I got fully involved, as you know, became a Catholic priest, and the rest is history. The bottom line is that when one door closes, you have to trust God that another one will open. If one window closes, trust God that He'll open another window for you. And the bottom line is if you're struggling with finding a job, maybe you're struggling with your self-esteem, you can trust God to make a way for you. God is faithful. He has a plan for your life, and it's going to happen. You simply have to trust. I want to tell you about self-esteem here for just a minute. People that are out of work and that are struggling, I understand because I've been through it. There's nothing worse. Wondering what your future is going to be and the difficulties. What I want to tell you is this: trust God and be proactive. Be passionate, take the initiative, and have ambition. Even after I got into ministry, I've always tried to live with passion. Traveled preaching parish missions, tried to develop beautiful sermons that would really help people. And then I wanted to reach out beyond the walls of the church. And that's why I felt like broadcast media, television and radio would be the way to go. Because I want to reach people that aren't going to church as well as people that are going to church. I was able to get into broadcast media, and it wasn't because the networks came after me. Rather, I had to go to them. And you don't know how hard that was for me to knock on their doors and to develop a pilot program, a pilot series, and to really get in the way so that they noticed me. It was hard at first, and it really took a lot of confidence and a lot of ambition and a lot of trials and tribulations. My point is, the doors finally opened. I kept trusting God, believing that God had a plan for my life, and this was it. But it took passion and enthusiasm and daring and knocking on doors and risking. What I want to say to you is if you are unemployed or struggling and being underemployed, be ambitious, be daring, be bold, be proactive. I remember the Hebrews were stuck at the Jordan River. They had to try to cross over the Jordan River to get into the Promised Land, but it was too wide. They couldn't do it. They were told to put their feet into the Jordan River and then it would stop, and certainly it did. And then they were able to cross. Same way, you have to be proactive. You have to step out. You have to be daring. You have to keep at it and not give up, trusting God the whole time. And then the river will part. The door will open. I have read that people hire passionate people. If you're searching for a job, maybe you don't have the best qualifications, but be enthusiastic in your interview, be passionate, because I've read that they hire passionate people over people that are qualified for the job. I remember one time I was flying on an airplane and heard the flight attendant give the call to buckle your seatbelt and do all this and do all that. It was so routine and so boring, nobody was listening. Went on another flight and the flight attendant was smiling and she was almost dancing up there talking about your seatbelt and what a great flight it's going to be. And everybody was listening because she was passionate. You could tell that she loved her job. When you look at the scriptures, people that worked, God worked through. And I want to tell you that God is at work in you and He will work through you. Those of you who are working have to believe that God will work through you in your job. Be passionate, be enthusiastic. I think about Jesus, for example. He worked for many years, as we know, as a carpenter. Nobody knew about him. Nobody knew he was the Messiah. He worked with his hands. He worked with his mind. Being a carpenter, his job actually formed him as a person, very practical, learned wisdom. And I know that because I was a carpenter for many years. Actually, I worked for a carpenter, my dad. My dad was so gracious. He had such a talent at carpentry, and he wanted me to have that talent, but I really didn't have it. Wasn't really mechanically inclined. But as I watched my dad, I learned so much about his work ethic. He laid foundations, and he taught me about laying good foundations. He worked with excellence. And I would watch him as he worked. My dad was not afraid to work. He put his heart and soul into his job. And he built the building. And it was very beautiful. There's a great nobility in work, a great dignity in work. That's one of the things that my dad taught me. Now, we are made in God's image. The book of Genesis said that God worked. He created all these different days. He produced light and living things, soil, growth of plants. The universe is all God's handiwork. And we have within us God's DNA. We have the desire to create, produce, and to be fruitful. That was God's first command to us. Be fruitful and multiply. We have within us this desire, this ethic, this work. We want to produce. We want to be fruitful. I think of artists and sculptors like Michelangelo, musicians, writers, teachers, engineers, producers, builders. There's this desire to want to create, to leave our mark, and to influence others. But it takes passion and energy, creativity, concentration, focus. And we have that in us. One of the greatest regrets that people have is that they didn't produce what they could have produced or create what they could have created with their life. They get to the end of their life, they look back at their life and they think, I should have done more. I think about Peter and Andrew, James and John. They were fishermen, working. Notice that Jesus called them, spoke to them as they were working. Same in our life. As we're working, we can hear the voice of God. I know a man who works in the insurance business, and he says that he prays while he works, and God leads him. It's amazing. He senses God speaking to him. Anyway, Peter, Andrew, James, John, they're working, and unfortunately, they were frustrated. They weren't catching anything. This is Luke chapter 5. They were cleaning their nets, another day where not much was happening. And Jesus told them to launch out into the deep, throw your nets over for a haul. And of course, Peter said, Master, we've been at it all night, all day. Nothing has been happening, but at your word, I will do it. What was Jesus telling him? He was telling him, Peter, think outside the box. Don't just do things the way you always do them. Risk, be daring, be bold, try new things, watch what happens. Launch out into the deep. And I found that that's the way it is in life. People will oftentimes say, better safe than sorry. Well, maybe you're safe, but I don't want to be sorry by being safe. I want to try new things. Launch out into the deep. That's why I got into television. I'm in way over my head with this. But when you launch out into the deep, that's where the fish are. That's when you get the haul. That's when you get the catch. I want you to not just work, but work with enthusiasm, with passion, with creativity, with daring. Try new things. As I said, many people get to the end of their life and they regret that they didn't live well or live fully. We were made to express, to create, to become. That's the saying that I love, that is the foundation of my ministry. Who you are is God's gift to you, but who you become is your gift to God. Jesus said the same thing. He said, God is still working. God didn't just rest on the seventh day and quit working. God is at work in you, and he will work through you. He said, God is still working and I'm working. And God worked through Jesus. They were persecuting him because he was healing on the Sabbath. God was working through Jesus on the Sabbath. Well, God is working in us because God is a worker and God is working through us. Remember that parable about the landowner? He was hiring all these people, 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, 9 in the morning, noon, even at 5 at night. And that parable generally is interpreted as, and rightly so, that God is very generous. And no matter what hour, he's willing to hire you and pay you the same amount. I like to think that that parable is about God wants us to work. He doesn't like it when people are sitting idle and they're not achieving their potential. He created us to work. Now, work isn't everything, but the bottom line is that a third of our life, we are working. We might as well be striving for achieving and becoming and trying our best, living with passion, developing and becoming all that we can be. My dad and I were close in our relationship. Worked with him as a carpenter. As I said, he had this magnificent gift, but I felt so inept. I just didn't really have the gift. I'm pretty good at sports and school and technology and those kind of things, but mechanically, I'm not really inclined that well. I can do it, but it takes me forever. I remember working with my dad one time, and he was up on the roof and he was hammering, and he would have 3 or 4 nails in, and I'm still working on my first nail. And I'm thinking to myself, why does my dad want me to work with him? Certainly it was because we had a good relationship, but really when I think about it, it was because I was his son. He didn't need me, but he wanted me to participate with him in the building that he was created. He wanted me to share the joy, the exhilaration once we finished. I was his son. He wanted me to be a part of it. And that's exactly it. When it comes to ministry or anything else that we do, God does not need us. I'm a Catholic priest, and I've been a priest for over 30 years and ministering on television. I like what John the Baptist said. God from these very stones can raise up children for Abraham. What do I mean by that? God can do whatever he wants without our help. He doesn't need us, but God has chosen, and this is the way that God designed everything, God has chosen to work with us and through us in the recreation of the world. If you're a minister, trust God that he's going to work in you and through you. Whatever you're doing in life, trust God that he has a plan and purpose for you. Same thing as I was thinking about it when it comes to intercessory prayer. When we pray to God for other people, for the world, for the church, God already knows. He knows what we need. He knows the world's situation. He really doesn't need our prayers per se. He can do it pretty well on his own. Thank you very much. However, the way God has designed it, he wants us to pray. He wants us to participate with him in the recreation, the salvation of the world. I think about, for example, Abraham. Remember way back when Sodom and Gomorrah was about to be destroyed, and Abraham, the great priest, one of the first priests in the Bible, although he wasn't officially ordained, you're a priest, a prophet, and a king. Maybe you're not ordained, but you still are. He petitioned God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. He said, Lord, if there's 50 righteous people, will you still destroy it? God said, no, I won't destroy it. Well, what about 25? If there's 25, will you still destroy it? Okay, no. And he got him all the way down to 10 or 5 righteous people there. Will you still He changed God's mind by his prayer. He agreed with God. He changed God. God worked through Abraham in our prayers too. God wants us to pray, to intercede for the world. This is the way he designed it. He can do it on his own. My dad can build that building very clearly, very perfectly without me. In fact, I probably messed it up more often than not. But he wanted me to be with him because I was his son. Same way with God. If you're a minister, whatever your job is, he gives us the dignity and the nobility of work and the dignity and the nobility of being a priestly people interceding for the world. God is at work in you and in me, changing the world and changing us into the image of Jesus. Think about doctors. They bring healing to people wonderfully. Most of us have had operations and sensed a doctor helping us, and nurses. Think about teachers. I remember it was a teacher when I was going through CCD class as a young man. It was a teacher who helped me with the Bible. She said this, truth is to be found in the Bible. And I remember that. I had fallen away years later, and I remembered what she said about truth being found in the Bible. And I came back to the Bible, had a great conversion. I remember one time I was in 9th grade English class. My English teacher came up to me and gave me a book, and he didn't give anybody else that book. It was called Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and he was giving it just to me. And it told me that he believed in me. He had confidence in me. He had great expectations for me. And I never forgot that. That was God working through that teacher for me. And then, of course, there's so many others, police, who protect us, help us in society, firemen, firewomen, ministers, priests, social workers, even politicians. They have the best of intentions. They may not go about it the right way, but I believe God works through all these people. This is God working in the world, working with us, all to bring redemption and salvation. Talking about nurses, I remember a story about my mom. She got sick at age 90 and had an operation. She was in hospital after the operation. She suffered some strokes, and it was the end of her life. She finally passed away. My 2 sisters and I were at her bedside. It was so hard to let go of my mom. We were there when she passed away and drew her last breath. We were just about to leave the room. My sisters left first. I was alone with my mom, and finally I was just about to walk out of the room, and a nurse came in. And I said to the nurse, I said, please take care of my mom. And she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. She said, I will take care of your mom just as if she was my mom. And I so needed that at that moment. That nurse was an angel to me. That was God working through the nurse, comforting me that she was going to take care of my mom's body. And it's the same in our life. How do we transform the world? Through generosity, through compassion, through kindness, and by working. Don't be afraid of work. Work is dignified and has great nobility. Back in 1991, St. John Paul II promulgated an encyclical about work. It was called Laborem Exercens. And he said that work is a good thing. Through work, we transform the world and fulfill ourselves as humans. As I said before, we spend a third of our life working, and it's meant to fulfill us and to contribute to the good of the world. I remember over Auschwitz, the entrance to Auschwitz, they had a saying, and it was facetious: work will set you free. They were trying to intimidate the people in the prison camp. Work will set you free, and it will set the world free as we work hard with enthusiasm. Work is a call. It's a call from God. Don't think of your work as a curse. Rather, right from the beginning, God wanted us to cultivate the garden. He wanted us to be fruitful and to multiply. I had the opportunity some years ago to go on a sabbatical. Sabbatical is a time when you take some rest from the ministry and you retool and you study and you can do whatever you want. Well, I toured a little bit. I went to the national parks and saw some of those, and it was really fun, had a good time. But the interesting thing is, I decided to write books, to preach missions, and produce for TV. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, that's what I do all the time. And the reason I did that is because that's what fulfills me. I love reaching out to people. I love being used by God to touch people. And it's the same in our life. As you open up yourself to God, He will work in you and through you. Jesus said, God is still working, and I'm working still. Work with passion, enthusiasm, reach out, launch out. That's where the fish are. And God will use you to catch those fish. You realize your potential. You become all that you can be. Just as Jesus showed up when Peter and Andrew, James and John were working, when Matthew was working, called them, spoke to them, ennobled them at their workplace, He's with you as you work. He's working in you, and He's working through you. See your work not just as drudgery or something that you have to do or just try to earn some money. See it as a call. It ennobles us. It dignifies us. And then push the boundaries. Launch out into the deep. Don't live with regrets. Become all that you can be. Be daring. Take the initiative. Be bold. Take chances. Reach for the stars, and at least you'll get the moon. And as I love to say, who you are is God's gift to you, but who you become is your gift to God. Trust God, He'll make a way for you, and don't just live with passion. As I said in my episode, there was a time when I couldn't even find a job, but then I launched out into the deep with initiative and ambition and enthusiasm. Now God has me broadcasting on television and radio, touching the lives of many. I got a letter from a woman in Australia. Here I am in Houston, Texas. I had no idea that I would ever be reaching out to people in Australia, the Caribbean, Europe, Africa, and all these different places. You see, when you launch out into the deep, you get a catch and become all that you can be. I wanted to tell you that I'm not afraid of work anymore. I've written 25 books to date, and people are being touched as they read these books. Have a special. If you buy 5 of my books, any of them, $50 plus shipping and handling. And if you buy all 25 books, it's half price. These books will inspire you, encourage you, and deepen your relationship with God, help you to change, and help you to realize your potential. And all that money goes not to me, I'm a priest with a vow of poverty. It will go to my ministry so that I can continue to launch out into the deep for a catch. And God is working through me, I believe, to touch your life. And thank you in advance. All you have to do is dial 844-FATHER-C, or you can go to my website, fathercedric.org, very secure, or write me in Houston, Texas, 77024. Thank you in advance, because all that money will go to the production and the airing of Live with Passion so that I can reach out to people in Australia, Africa, and the United States and Canada. Thank you in advance. Don't just live with passion.
All Catholic, all the time. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul.